My name is Annette E. Handy. I'm 33 years old, and the moment I saw my boyfriend sitting at the table I reserved with his ex-boyfriend, I realized I had been planning a future with someone who had already replaced me. The restaurant looked exactly how I imagined it. Soft lighting, quiet conversations, the kind of place where people make promises they intend to keep. I had booked that table 30 days in advance. I had rehearsed the moment in my head more times than I'd admit. But when I walked in, everything stopped. Daniel was already there, sitting comfortably, and next to him was Adrian, his ex. The one he told me 6 months ago was completely out of his life. She smiled when she saw me, too calm, too familiar. "Annette, there you are," Daniel said, like nothing was wrong, like this was normal, like this was acceptable. I stood there for a second too long, trying to understand what I was looking at, trying to force it into something that made sense. It didn't. "Look who I ran into," he added casually. Ran into. I almost laughed. Adrian leaned back slightly, her hand resting on the back of Daniel's chair like she belonged there. "Hope you don't mind," she said. "Small world." My brain stalled, because this wasn't a coincidence. This was a decision. I sat down slowly, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear how far this would go. "This was supposed to be our dinner," I said quietly. Daniel waved his hand dismissively. "And it still is, just more relaxed." More relaxed. I stared at him, waiting for something, anything that resembled awareness. There was none. The waiter came. Adrian ordered first, confidently. Daniel followed. "Annette loves Pinot," he added, like he was including me in something, like I was still part of the table. I didn't touch the menu. I didn't need to. "Don't make this weird," he said under his breath when he noticed my silence. And that was it. That was the moment everything shifted. Not when I saw her, not when I sat down. That sentence, that tone, that dismissal. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. They relaxed. They thought I was backing down. I wasn't. I stood up, calm, controlled. "Can I get the bill?" I asked. Daniel blinked. "What are you doing?" "Paying," I replied. The bill came. I didn't check it. I didn't hesitate. I signed, left a tip, and looked at him one last time. "You're right," I repeated. "I don't get to question your choices." Then I picked up my bag and walked away. They called my name, both of them. I didn't turn around. Because the moment you understand something clearly, you don't argue with it. You leave it where it is. The silence after I walked out of that restaurant didn't feel like defeat. It felt like something had finally stopped pretending to be okay. I got into my car, closed the door, and just sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the quiet settle. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Daniel. I didn't open it. Another buzz, then another. I already knew what they would say. "You overreacted. It wasn't a big deal. Why are you making this weird?" That word again. Weird. Like my reaction to being humiliated was the problem, not what he did. I drove home without answering. Every red light felt longer than usual, like the world was stretching time just to make sure I really understood what had happened. By the time I got back to my apartment, the messages had stacked up. Different numbers, same tone. I finally opened one. "Annette, seriously? You're just going to leave like that?" I stared at it for a second, then locked my phone and set it down. Not out of anger, out of clarity. Responding would mean stepping back into their version of reality, and I was done living there. The apartment felt different that night. Not emptier, just honest. I walked through it slowly, noticing things I hadn't before. The way I always adjusted my schedule around his. The way I softened my words so they wouldn't trigger that eye roll. The way I had been shrinking without realizing it. I sat on the couch and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, there was no noise in my head trying to justify something that didn't make sense. The next morning, the messages kept coming. It was just dinner. Adrian needed somewhere to be. You're being dramatic. I read them all with the same detached calm. It was almost surreal how predictable it was. No apology, no acknowledgement, just repositioning the story so I looked unreasonable. I blocked one number, then another. It became mechanical. Tap, confirm, done. Like shutting off switches in a room I no longer needed. By midday, a mutual friend texted me. Hey, what actually happened? I paused, then typed one sentence. He brought his ex to our anniversary dinner and told me I didn't get to question it. That was it. No adjectives, no explanation, just fact. The reply came fast. What? And just like that, I felt something shift. Not because I defended myself, but because I didn't have to. That afternoon, I went for a walk. No destination, just movement. The air felt clearer than it should have. I realized something halfway down the block. I wasn't replaying the scene anymore. I wasn't trying to understand why. I already did. It wasn't confusion. It was choice. His choice. And once you accept that, there's nothing left to argue with. When I got back, there was one new message that stood out. A different tone. Slower. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I read it twice. That one mattered. Because it wasn't about the dinner. It was about expectation. He thought I would stay. Adjust. Absorb it. Like I always had. I set the phone down again and didn't respond. Because this time, I didn't. The silence stretched into something solid over the next few days. Not fragile, not waiting to break, just there, steady, like a line I had finally drawn and wasn't about to step back over. I didn't check my phone as often. I didn't feel that pull to explain myself. Instead, I started noticing how quiet everything had become without him in it. No sudden mood shifts, no subtle corrections, no feeling like I had to adjust the way I spoke just to keep the peace. It wasn't dramatic freedom, it was subtle, and somehow that made it more real. By the third day, the messages changed again. A new number lit up my screen. I let it sit there for a few seconds before opening it. You're really going to throw this away over nothing? I read it slowly, letting the words settle. Nothing. That's what he had reduced it to. 3 years, trust, respect, nothing. I exhaled quietly and locked my phone. No reply. Not because I didn't have one, but because I didn't need to give it to him. Later that evening, another message came through. Same unknown number pattern, same voice behind it. Adrian's gone, okay? It's done. You can stop this now. That one almost made me smile, not because it was funny, but because it proved something important. He still thought this was about Adrian. Like removing her from the picture would reset everything. Like the problem was a person, not the choice he made. He didn't understand that what broke wasn't the situation, it was the way he handled it. And that doesn't get undone just because circumstances change. I didn't block that number right away. I just set the phone down and let it buzz again, and again, until it stopped. The quiet that followed felt earned. That night, I slept without interruption. No replaying the restaurant, no second guessing, just rest. The next morning, I got a call from a friend of his, someone I barely knew. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. Hey, Annette, he said awkwardly. Daniel told me what happened. Sounds like things got out of hand. I leaned against the kitchen counter, holding the phone loosely. "What did he say?" I asked. There was a pause. "He said you left because you couldn't handle him having friends, that you embarrassed him in public." I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said evenly, "He brought his ex to our anniversary dinner and told me I didn't get to question it." Silence. Real silence this time. "Oh," he said finally. That one word carried more weight than anything else. Understanding, correction, shift. "I'm not asking you to pick sides," I added. "I'm just not going to be misrepresented." "Yeah," he said quickly. "No, I get it. That's different." We hung up shortly after, and I realized something as I set the phone down. I didn't feel defensive. I didn't feel like I had to convince anyone. I had said what happened. That was enough. By the end of the week, the messages slowed. Not because he accepted it, but because the approach wasn't working. Silence doesn't give people anything to push against. It forces them to sit with their own version of events, and eventually, that gets uncomfortable. That's when the tone shifted again. One night, close to midnight, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. I didn't play it immediately. I made tea, sat down, and then pressed play. His voice was quieter this time. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "Annette," he said, "I don't know what to do here. I didn't think it would end like this. I thought you'd talk to me. I thought we'd figure it out." He paused. "I miss you." I let the message finish, then set the phone down. Because missing me wasn't the point. Respecting me was. And that part had already been decided. After that voicemail, something in me shifted again. But not the way you'd expect. It wasn't a softening. It wasn't regret. It was just distance. The kind that doesn't come from anger, but from understanding something too clearly to ignore. I didn't call him back. I didn't replay the message. I just let it exist. Like everything else he had said. Something that belonged to a version of my life that had already ended. The next few days were quiet, almost deliberately so. No late-night texts, no new numbers trying to sneak past my block list, no sudden emotional appeals. It felt like he had paused, not because he accepted it, but because he didn't know what move came next. And that silence, for the first time, didn't feel tense. It felt like confirmation. Like we had both reached the point where the story couldn't be rewritten anymore. I started rebuilding in small ways. Not dramatically, not with some big declaration of independence, just quiet decisions. I rearranged my apartment, moved things that had always stayed in the same place because we liked it that way. I changed routines I didn't even realize were built around him. Even the smallest things, what I cooked, when I ate, how late I stayed up, felt different when they were mine alone. It wasn't exciting, it wasn't loud, but it was steady, and that mattered more. About 10 days after the dinner, I saw his name again. Not a message this time, a missed call. No follow-up, no voicemail. Just the call sitting there on my screen like a question he didn't know how to ask anymore. I stared at it for a moment, then cleared the notification. Because answering would mean reopening something I had already closed, and I wasn't willing to do that, not even for curiosity. Later that afternoon, a mutual friend reached out again. "He's not doing great," she said carefully, like she wasn't sure how I'd respond. "He didn't expect you to actually disappear." I leaned back against the couch, letting that settle. "I didn't disappear," I said. "I left." There was a difference, and I needed people to understand it, even if they didn't say it out loud. She didn't argue. "Yeah," she said after a pause. "I think he's starting to realize that." That was the first time I felt something close to closure, not from him, but from the situation itself. Because realization doesn't fix anything. It just comes too late. A few days later, I ran into him. It wasn't planned. Of course it wasn't. It never is. I was leaving a coffee shop, keys in hand, when I saw him standing across the street. He looked the same at first glance. Same posture, same jacket, but something was off. Subtle, but there. Like the confidence he used to carry so easily had been replaced with something heavier. He saw me a second later, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then he crossed the street. "Annette," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Not too close, not like before." "Daniel," I replied, keeping my tone even. There was a pause, a long one. The kind where both people are waiting for something to happen, but neither knows what it should be. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about everything." I nodded once. I figured. "I didn't handle it right," he added. Not defensive this time, not dismissive, just stating it. I watched him for a second, searching for something in his face. Not apology, because I already knew that wouldn't change anything, but understanding. Real understanding. "Yeah," I said quietly. "You didn't." Another pause. He shifted slightly, like he wanted to say more but wasn't sure how. "I thought you'd fight for us," he said. "You always did." That one almost made me laugh. "Exactly," I replied. He blinked, caught off guard. "I stopped," I continued. "That's the difference." The words landed between us, heavier than anything else that had been said. Because that was the truth of it. He wasn't confused about what happened. He was confused about why I didn't respond the way I always had. "I didn't think," he started, then stopped. "I know," I said. And I did. He didn't think I would leave. He didn't think I would choose silence over explanation, distance over negotiation. He didn't think I would walk away without giving him the chance to control how it ended. That's what this really was. Not a misunderstanding. A miscalculation. "I miss you," he said finally. I looked at him for a moment, then shook my head slightly. "I don't," I said. Not cruel, not sharp, just honest. That was the moment it ended for him. I could see it. Not dramatically, not with some visible collapse, just a quiet understanding settling in his expression. The same clarity I had felt days earlier, only now it was his turn. "Okay," he said after a second. And that was it. No argument, no attempt to pull me back in, no final speech, just acceptance. We stood there for another second. Then I nodded once and turned away. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. I just walked to my car, got in, and drove away. And this time, it didn't feel like leaving something behind. It felt like moving forward. 6 months passed in a way that didn't feel like time moving forward. It felt like something settling into its final shape. The kind of quiet that no longer needed to prove anything. My life didn't transform overnight. There was no dramatic glow-up, no sudden reinvention, just consistency, the kind I hadn't realized I was missing. My apartment became mine in a way that went beyond furniture and layout. It was the absence of tension, the absence of needing to adjust myself to someone else's mood. And that absence slowly turned into something solid, something stable. I worked, I trained, I cooked, I slept, and none of it required permission or explanation. And that simplicity, that quiet autonomy, was more powerful than anything I thought I had lost. I heard about her less often, and when I did, it came in fragments, like distant echoes that didn't quite reach me anymore. Mark was gone for good, not in a dramatic exit, just the kind of disappearance that leaves behind unpaid bills and unanswered questions. She had moved out of the apartment, downsized into something smaller, something temporary, something that didn't match the version of her life she used to present. The people around her had shifted too, not all at once, but gradually. The ones who thrived on chaos stayed close. The ones who valued consistency and honesty drifted away. And I wasn't part of that ecosystem anymore, so it all felt distant, like watching a storm from behind glass. The last time I saw her wasn't in a dramatic confrontation. It was in a grocery store, the kind of place where everything is stripped down to routine. No performance, no curated image, just people moving through their day. I was standing in the aisle, comparing two different cuts of meat, thinking about dinner, something simple, when I felt that shift again, that awareness of someone looking at me. I turned, and there she was, holding a small basket with things that didn't match the life she used to live. Cheaper brands, fewer items, a quiet kind of compromise. She looked tired, not physically exhausted, but worn down in a way that comes from things not going the way you expected. "Annette," she said, my name catching slightly in her throat, like she wasn't sure how it would land. I nodded once. "Chloe," keeping my tone neutral, because that's what she was now. Someone I recognized but didn't belong to. She glanced at my cart, then back at me, and I could see the comparison happening in real time, not just of circumstances, but of direction. "You look good," she said, and I answered with a simple, "Thanks," because there was nothing else to add. There was a pause, longer than it should have been, and then she said it. "I've been thinking about everything." And for a moment, I just watched her, not waiting for an apology, not expecting anything, just listening. "I made a mistake," she added, and this time it was quieter, less defensive, more real than anything she had said before. I nodded once, acknowledging it without giving it weight it didn't have anymore. "I'm glad you see that," I said, and I saw something flicker in her expression, something like hope, something like the belief that recognition could undo what had already been decided. "Does that mean—" she started, but I shook my head gently before she could finish, because that was the part she still didn't understand. "No," I said, and it didn't come out harsh. It didn't need to. It was just the truth. She blinked, confusion settling in, because in her version of the story, this was the moment things turned, the moment where everything could be repaired. But that only works if the foundation is still there. "I'm not angry," I added, because that was true. "And I'm not hurt anymore." And that seemed to unsettle her more than rejection would have, because it meant she no longer had any influence over how I felt. "Then why?" she asked, and I took a second before answering, not to soften it, but to make sure it was clear. "Because I don't feel anything for you anymore," I said, and that was it. No build-up, no explanation, just the reality she hadn't prepared for. Her expression changed, not dramatically, just enough to show the shift, because that's the one thing you can't argue with. You can't negotiate someone back into caring once they've let go. She stood there for a moment, like she was waiting for something else, something familiar, a reaction she could work with, but there was nothing left to give. "Okay," she said finally, and this time it sounded different. Not defensive, not sharp, just resigned. I nodded once. "Take care of yourself." And then I turned back to the shelf, picked what I needed, and moved on. I didn't look back, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because there was nothing behind me that I needed anymore. As I walked to the checkout, I realized something that hadn't fully formed until that moment. I hadn't lost her at that dinner. I had understood her. And once you truly understand someone, you don't go back. You just move forward with that knowledge. I paid for my groceries, walked out into the evening air, and for the first time since everything happened, the quiet inside me didn't feel like something that needed to be filled. It felt complete.